So he packed his young family up, and he leaves, and he spends a couple of years going in and out of Britain and giving lectures at religious centers around Britain, and ultimately decides to move back to Sana'a in Yemen, where his father had built a large family home near the university, and they built an apartment for Anwar and his kids there. And then the Abu Ghraib scandal happens, and al-Awlaki is recording these sermons, and they're becoming increasingly sharp in their condemnation of the US-fueled wars around the world, and he's becoming more and more radical. And then his sermons, which are being distributed around the world in CDs, some of them on the internet, start to pop up in a number of investigations into small terror plots that were foiled in Britain, in the United States, and elsewhere. And the US government became concerned that Anwar al-Awlaki has the potential to inspire lone wolf acts of terrorism or small groups of individual young Muslims to commit acts of terrorism in Western countries. And so he's, in a very real way, on their radar. And in 2006, Anwar al-Awlaki is arrested in Yemen on bogus charges of intervening in a tribal dispute. And he is put in prison for 18 months, 17 of them in solitary confinement. The FBI comes over to Yemen and interrogates al-Awlaki while he's in prison. And I reviewed al-Awlaki's prison writings, and I talk about this in the book. They're fascinating. He was given only a limited number of books. He wrote that he hated Shakespeare, thought Shakespeare was an imperialist, and wanted nothing to do with Shakespeare. He loved Charles Dickens, and would compare figures in the Yemeni or U.S. government to Uriah Heep and other sort of epic figures. And he also did food reviews in the prison book, but many of his writings were about his religious development. And he started to read the work of radical Islamic scholars and was relating to their writings on jihad and the necessity of jihad against crusader forces. And when he emerged from prison, he was a changed man. He was going down the path now to viewing himself at war with the United States, if not on an ideological level, perhaps even on an actual tactical level. Al-Awlaki believed that the United States was responsible for having him locked up. And the United Nations actually investigated his imprisonment and said that it was extralegal. What I found out in my reporting is that there was a meeting while al-Awlaki was in prison in Washington, D.C. with a Yemeni official, Bandar Bush, the famed Saudi diplomat whose nickname is Bandar Bush because he's so close to the Bush family, and John Negroponte. And at the time, John Negroponte, who certainly knows a lot about dirty wars from his time in Central America in the 80s, John Negroponte was the director of national intelligence. So you have this senior U.S. official meeting with a Yemeni official and with a Saudi official, a very powerful Saudi official. And Saudis control a lot of the U.S. policy on Yemen. And Negroponte, according to my sources, told the Yemeni government at the time that the U.S. wanted al-Awlaki kept in prison for 4 or 5 years, knowing well that there were no actual charges against him, because they wanted young Muslims to forget about Anwar al-Awlaki. They didn't want him to have the ability to potentially influence acts of terrorism. And Yemen kept him in prison as long as they could, but there was so much tribal outrage that they had to release him. And the U.S. government was furious that Anwar al-Awlaki was back on the streets. So he comes back out, he's back in Sana'a, and his house is being monitored by the Yemen's political security officers who are trained and funded by the United States. And there's pressure being put on the al-Awlaki family to have Anwar go back or to live in some kind of default house arrest.